Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to part one of this session run by Caleb and Karen, who you can see on screen. And before we get started today, just to let you know that the session is being recorded and it will be available afterwards for anybody who can't attend or anybody who wants to revisit as well. And Karen and Caleb will also be able to share those slides, and we'll get those uploaded onto our website so you can reference them at a later date. And so before we get started, I'm just going to pop up a quick poll just to see where people are in their journey of employing a technical apprentice, because we can imagine that people are coming from kind of all different areas of that. So I'll just launch that now, and if you can participate in that, that would be great, so we can get an idea of who's in. Okay, so we've got answers coming through, and I'll share those on screen once we've got them. Hopefully we'll give people 30 more seconds. We've got morning from Southampton. Okay, I'll end the poll now and share the results with everybody. So can someone give me a thumbs up when you can see them? Perfect, thank you everybody. Okay, so a few people have attended the session before that Karen and Caleb have run, so it can still be useful. Things can be updated throughout as things change in the landscape, but the majority of people haven't, so welcome to this, and we're hoping that you'll find it very useful. And then on question 2, quite a few people are just curious, and some considering, some already in the process, and some already employ a technical apprentice. So for those who do have that experience, it would be really useful if you can share that in the chat if people are asking questions, and kind of share your experience as we go along through the day. So I'll stop sharing that now, and I will hand over to Karen and Caleb.
Thank you very much, Sat. Thanks for that, and really interesting to see a real kind of both on the call, a real geographical mix today, but also a mix of people with experience of apprenticeships. So some people just thinking about it, some people are actively thinking about it, some recruiting, and some already having apprentices. If you have attended the session last year when we ran it, there is some new things. So the apprenticeship funding rules change every year, so we have updated some of the information on that, and again updated it based on our experiences. So before I share the slides, we'll just introduce ourselves. Karen, do you want to go first?
Good morning, everybody. Yep, it's lovely to see. And for those of you that haven't been to our presentations before, a very big welcome. I noticed, I think it was about 88% by the time Savannah had stopped the poll. So lots of new faces for this particular presentation. Yep, I'm Karen Bailey-Smith. I'm the Technical Development Manager at Sheffield Hallam University. I'm also a specialist advisor to the NTDC and part of the Trailblazer group that's led by Caleb that developed the level 3 higher education technician standard. So worked with Caleb and the NTDC for quite a while now on apprenticeships, and I currently have 2 apprentices in my team. Soon to be, I'm losing one at the end of August because he'll have passed and be moving on, but then hopefully recruiting another 3 ready for September. So thanks, Caleb.
Thanks, Karen. And I'm Caleb Wright. I am the Deputy Director at NTDC, and in my day-to-day role, I'm the Apprenticeship Scheme Manager at the University of Birmingham. So I support our apprentices across all different areas, but we do have a growing number of technical apprentices doing lots of different standards, and are now exploring how we can expand that to existing staff as well. The session today, the overview, we're just going to give a bit of a background on apprenticeships, what they are. Appreciate some of you may have differing knowledge on that, and how you kind of understand that. Choosing the right apprenticeship standard. So how do you choose what apprenticeship you want your apprentice to take? You may think that's straightforward if you've never had an apprentice before, but there's actually a real multitude of apprenticeship standards. Probably one of the most critical things, choosing the right training provider, and also one of the most difficult things, choosing the right training provider. Recruiting your apprentice. So how do you go finding the right apprentice? and planning the apprentice induction. And as I say, this is a two-part session. So the second part, we'll look into the stages after that. And then just a bit of information on the education technician standard at the end of the session. Just to say, the session in terms of funding and things is based on the English funding model, which is what my knowledge is on. However, a lot of the information in the session will be relevant to the devolved nations as well, because apprenticeship funding is devolved to the different nations. But the majority of what we are saying is relevant whether you're in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, or Wales. So I'll pass over to Karen for the next slide.
Okay, so I'm sure lots of people on the call know what an apprentice is, but this is the actual definition from the ESFA, the Education Skills Funding Agency. And it is basically what it says: an apprenticeship is a job with training. But the key points here are around the apprenticeship gaining knowledge and practical experience and wider skills as part of the standard they're working with, and they need to be competent in their immediate job and future career. So the key part there really is this mixture of on and off the job training. The training is a key part of an apprenticeship. It's not simply a nice to have. As an employer, you can't stop the apprentice going on their training and doing their training. It's a complete package. Okay, so the two different ways in which the apprentice gains their training.
Have you got a spare key for the nitrogen?
Can either be
Yes, I have.
Could you just get everyone to mute, please? Is
Sorry,
that possible? Thank you. I'll just hang on, take over. I'm just going to mute people. I do apologise about that. Sorry, yes, the two different ways in which the apprenticeship can receive their training. That's off the job. So that tends to be, for the most part, away from their role, not necessarily away from their place of work, because they may go to another area of their place of work to do some of this training. And then the on-the-job training, that's when they're learning new techniques, new methods, new processes during their working hours and things like that. Okay, thank you, Caleb.
Thanks, Karen. So one of the big barriers, I think, to always taking on apprenticeships is funding, and everyone always thinks, how do we get the funding for an apprentice? Well, the funding for the training can come in one of three ways, really. The first is through direct funding if you've got an apprenticeship levy. The majority of universities in England will have an apprenticeship levy. So all employers in the United Kingdom will pay the apprenticeship levy, but the majority of employers in England, the majority of universities certainly, will receive back funding from their apprenticeship levy. In the devolved nations, that funding goes directly to the government to apportion as they will with training providers directly. In England, the funding is distributed by the employers. So the employers get the money back and can decide how they want to spend it. Now, the universities obviously are quite large employers often, so will have often a considerable amount of apprenticeship levy to spend. The levy will only fund the apprenticeship training. It doesn't fund the salary. And I do, unfortunately, often have managers come to me disappointed when I tell them, unfortunately, I can't fund the salaries. I think I'd be, even though we do have a lot of apprentices at Birmingham, we have over 150, I think we'd have a lot more if it funded the salary as well. It is worth mentioning there are some potential incentive payments for recruiting an apprentice aged 16 or 17 that are paid to you via the training provider. We reinvest those payments into the support we provide for our apprentices at Birmingham, but you can choose to spend that how you will. If your institution or university doesn't have apprenticeship levy coming back to them, then the training can be funded through levy transfer, which is where a large employer donor organisation sends you their apprenticeship levy. Just highlighting, you can't spend the levy with yourself then, because I know a number of universities are also training providers, particularly for the degree and master's level apprenticeships. You also could look at what's called co-investment. That's where the government pays 95% of the training fee, and then you as the university employer pay the remaining 5%. All of the funding is controlled through a digital account. it's worth looking at who manages that digital account. It very often lies within payroll, so payroll set it up because of the link with the tax deduction for the levy. At Birmingham, we have direct control in HR of the account. It depends whether you've got a specific person looking after apprenticeships in your university. But I would say HR is a good place to start to try and find out who has access if you don't know. So apprenticeships went through quite a radical change the middle of last decade, where they went from the old way of doing apprenticeships, which was apprenticeship frameworks, predominantly designed by training providers, to apprenticeship standards. And apprenticeship standards are generally designed by employers through what's known as a trailblazer group. The employers compose a list of duties, almost like a job description really, the knowledge, skills and behaviours required for any occupation. And it's worth highlighting here that apprenticeships go right up to master's level. So again, it's a big difference in how apprenticeships operate now. So you could come in as a level 3 lab technician or education technician apprentice, progress to the lab scientist degree apprenticeship, and then even do the research level 7 apprenticeship postgraduate after that. So you can really move through the different occupational pathways. So at the moment, and this is as of this morning, but it changes quite often, there are 674 approved apprenticeship standards and over 200 standards that are being developed by employers. And that's a lot of different occupations. And obviously there's loads of technical ones, but there's also anything from a solicitor and a doctor to a hospitality worker or a business administrator. So a real wide range of standards. The Trailblazer groups work with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, or IFATE. They were set up, it's a government quango that was set up to manage technical education, really. They're doing a number of other things as well as apprenticeships. So they also look after T-levels, if you've heard of that, and higher technical qualifications. As part of their kind of goal, they are looking at moving people from what are historically NVQs and BTECs onto T-levels, apprenticeships and those courses. The Institute works in partnership with the Education Skills Funding Agency, which is part of the Department for Education. And the idea of the apprenticeship standard is that it really reflects what employers actually need in the workplace. There was a feeling prior to this system that the training provider just dictated what the apprenticeship should contain, and often employers felt that these weren't actually the skills required for that specific occupation. The slides obviously will be sent out, and there is a link there to the list of apprenticeship standards, and you'll see they're divided into knowledge, they're divided into different sectors, but also you've got a list of duties and the knowledge, skills and behaviours. I'll now pass back to Karen to talk about how you go about choosing the right apprenticeship standard.
Thank you, Caleb. Rereading that sentence in the top of that, I don't know about, the right apprenticeship standard is probably not the correct terminology now. I think probably sort of maybe the most appropriate, certainly from experience. You think you have an idea in mind of which standard you would like to use, but then when you start investigating, working with the teams that want to host the apprentice, that kind of thing, that actually, or maybe this standard isn't quite right, I need to look at something a little bit more appropriate. So I would start off maybe with you will have a subject area that you can narrow it down, but have a look through the standards on the IFATE site, and it might be that there is another standard or alternatives that may be more appropriate for you. So start with a little bit of an open kind of mind, and then work from there. So the bullet points that we're talking about here on the screen should help you to decide which is the most appropriate apprenticeship standard. The first one here, why do you want to employ an apprentice? Is it that you have a particular problem doing some recruitment in a particular team or subject area? Have you got a skills gap and you want to sort of start looking at the longer term strategy of filling that skills gap? Do you want the apprentice to be a current member of staff, something that we'll go into a little bit more detail later, but a current member of the team, and you want to upskill them or give them some skills in a new area? They could do an apprenticeship while they're working. So have a real think about why you want to employ them. And what do you want to achieve by having an apprentice in the team? Again, is it to do with your recruitment and your succession planning, sustainability of roles? Is it to focus on creating opportunities for your local community? Is it to, lots of people can use apprenticeships to sort of diversify their team. There's all sorts of reasons, and those will be more individual to each recruiting manager. Decide which team, obviously, you would like the apprentice to be hosted in. Different institutions work in very different ways. For me, I manage my apprentices, but I'm not their operational manager, their day-to-day manager. So it was kind of up to me to work with my various operational teams to decide who could host and support and manage an apprentice best, really, based on a whole host of reasons. So just make sure that you're looking at a team that has either had experience of doing it before, or the team might have come to you or whatever, saying they've got a particular issue with recruitment and sustainability and that kind of thing feeding into the team. Work with the managers, if you're not the direct operational manager of the teams, and make sure they understand what an apprenticeship is. I've done things like host Q&A sessions and discussed the range of different standards that would be a possibility with the team, and got their engagement to look at and choose the appropriate standard. And then the last one is really important. Look at the duration of the standard. Standards range from, what's the minimum, Caleb? Is it 9 months? No, it's not. It's changed again. Yeah.
So normally I would say 12, well, just over 12 months plus endpoint assessment. So always allow 3 months for endpoint assessment. So I'd say the shortest is 15 months. But with technical roles, you're probably looking at 2 years.
Level 7s, they can go up to 5, 6, 7 years sometimes. But you've just got to make sure that you've got the salary money to support the length of the standard. You do not want an apprentice to be finishing their terms of employment, their temporary contract, before they have even entered the assessment gateway and things for their actual apprenticeship. So make sure you've got the salary and that the two line up. Okay, thank you, Caleb. Okay, sorry, I'm down to one screen today and I'm moving people around. So, okay. If you might have an idea in mind what you want your apprentice to do, which team they want to fit in, that kind of thing. But start with your job description and make sure the apprentice, if you appoint an apprentice in that area, make sure that apprentice, when appointed, would be able to carry out the duties listed in the standard. So your job description and the duties of the standard should pretty much marry up. They won't be exact, but you need to be creating the opportunity for the apprentice to complete those duties in the practical workplace. Mentioned this before, is the apprentice new to the institution or employer, or is this development for an existing member of staff? That might affect the level of apprenticeship that you're looking at. So the levy obviously pays for any level of apprenticeship, but it's the level that you need to make the decision of, and you have control over as well. Mm-hmm. And discuss with your colleagues and the training provider to make sure you understand how it works, how the process works, and use networks such as this to ask questions of experienced managers. There's plenty of us out there now, which is good. So yeah. For me, I ended up in almost a bit of a circle, sort of vicious circle sometimes. I had an idea of a standard that I wanted to use, but I couldn't actually find a training provider to provide the education part of said standard. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of working backwards. Do you want your apprentice to attend a local college or a local education provider, or are you happy for them to travel further afield and have block teaching away from the workplace? It really depends on your individual team circumstances and how you want that apprentice to spend their off-the-job training time. Unfortunately, there are some standards that have been approved and are working, but for whatever reason, education providers haven't taken up those standards, so sometimes there are no training providers. And I've just alluded to that last point there, balancing act sometimes work backwards. So you have an idea, you investigate it, oh, that idea is not going to work, right, I'll go back again and go off in a slightly different direction to try and work out what's best for you. I think one of my examples was I would have quite liked my apprentices to both have been at the same education provider, just to provide a bit of a buddy system and familiarity and things like that. However, the two different apprentice standards I'm using, they were not both catered for at one institute, at one FE college. I've had to use two different FE colleges because of the difference in the standards that I'm working with. So yeah. Thank you, Caleb. So some standards have a mandatory qualification associated with them. If you've identified an education provider to provide that standard, they will know about this, and they are the ones that usually provide the mandatory qualification. That might be in the form of a BTEC, might be in the form of a degree. There's other professional qualifications associated with some standards. So you do need to check that with your education provider. Some of the standards can lead to professional recognition. So through the NTDC, actually, there's quite a bit of work done with people like the Science Council to align professional registration with apprenticeship standards. You know, if the apprentice is going through this process and they're doing a lot of reflection and documenting all their work and producing a portfolio, they're 90% of the way there to completing the professional recognition and application process. Excuse me, there may be a funding cap for the standard as well. In fact, most times are. Again, you don't really have any control over that. If that's a standard you've chosen to use, that will be managed by your education provider, and what they charge for delivering that standard is kind of it's sort of fixed. You don't have a lot of sway really in that arena. Okay. So in terms of examples of standards that you could use, the HE, the education technician at level 3. Now, I noted there's a question in the chat about the actual IFATE code number. We'll pop that in the chat. An engineering technician at level 3. If you've got existing staff, laboratory 5-6 degree level, and at level 7 as well. So apprenticeships are really good for existing staff, for upskilling existing staff and giving them the chance to undertake some higher level qualifications. Thank you, Caleb. Okay. So these bullet points kind of directly feed into the link that's just below them. So all your training providers should be on the register of apprenticeship training providers. Using the levy can only be used for those providers that are on this register. So it's really important that you double check that. And obviously, because of them being FE colleges and provision of training to a funded and recognised government programme, they are often, I'd say most of them, Caleb, is that right, are subject to the Ofsted inspection process. Yeah. We'll talk about the education provider in a separate section, so I won't get into Ofsted kind of things at the moment. Yes. If you use the IFATE website, it will link in to the training providers that provide that standard. So you click on that part of the various pages, and it will take you to all the subsequent training providers there. So yeah, that's a useful link to have, the IFATE site. Thank you. Okay, we're on to the training providers. Is it still me? Is it you, Caleb, now?
I got it. I can take
it's over. All right. No, that's fine. I don't mind.
Sorry.
As long as people aren't too fed up with hearing my voice in one chunk. So you've identified a standard that you want to use for your apprentice, and it may be that standard is delivered by lots of different education providers. for me, as I mentioned before, it was important to have an education provider geographically local. I wanted my apprentices to be able to have some time in college or whatever their education institute with other apprentices, and time away from work to do their off-the-job training. That's not always the case. It might be that your nearest provider is a little bit further afield, but lots of providers do online training. Some providers do what we call block teaching. So it might be that the apprentice does, say, a week of off-the-job training in blocks regularly throughout the year. All the different training providers provide the off-the-job training part in slightly different ways, really. Website to look at training providers for delivering a standard. Just because a particular training provider is on there, they have a particular standard at that time, because it depends here on whether they've had enough applications and things, and whether it's financially viable for them to deliver it. If you're recruiting at the same time as other local universities, get in touch with them, because it might be that as a collective together, you might only be recruiting 1 or 2 apprentices as an individual institution, but if you've got recruiting 10 apprentices altogether, so that would be potentially more financially viable for the local education provider to think about supporting you in this.
And can I just chip in there, Karen?
Yeah, sure, of course.
We'll be talking a bit later on about a new group that NTDC has set up for technical managers with apprentices, and it may be worth using that group for thinking about this. But also, I know recently there's a few other universities have got together on the education technician, and it can be done nationally if the provider delivers on a national basis as well.
Yeah, some of the private providers do that, have that method of provision, don't they? So yeah. Because you're using your employer's levy to pay the training provider, there is it's almost a procurement process. So work with whoever manages your digital system and payroll and finance and things to make sure you're following all your internal procurement rules. For whatever reason, your particular chosen training provider may not be on your institute's list of suppliers or approved suppliers, because you have to pay them at the end of the day for training your apprentice and doing the off-the-job training. So how would you have time?
We're fine.
Time. Yep. Okay. Okay, just in general tips. I mean, I've just mentioned this previously about how the training provider might deliver their training. Work out what's best really for you. Chances are, if you're using one of the standards that's quite popular, there will be a provider that, your teaching timetable, your timetable of how you're delivering your service, whatever might be the root sort of basis for the apprentice's workload. You'll be able to find someone who can deliver the training accordingly. For me, day release was fine. It meant that I knew exactly which day my apprentices were away from work. It allowed for a lot more planning and flexibility within the team of their colleagues to support any work that the apprentice would do on those days, that kind of thing. But equally, block delivery is okay. What should happen from the training provider? You should get at least the full academic year's dates well in advance of when your apprentice will need to be either at the education provider themselves at the college, or whether the education provider, training provider is coming on site to yourself and delivering the training in the workplace. So that's really key to help you plan. It's really, I found this really effective in getting engagement and stuff, of involving colleagues and other apprentices in any of the decision making. And by the decision making, I mean around things like, okay, so how can we release the apprentice to do their training? What dates fit best? How can we cover their workload? There are all sorts of things there. We briefly mentioned Ofsted. So your training provider is subject to Ofsted inspections. So look at their Ofsted reports. And look at, you're paying your training provider really at the end of the day. So look at what extras your training provider will do. Caleb's way more experience in dealing with different training providers than I am, but even the small number that I've worked with, the variation in what they will provide is, oh my goodness, it's astounding sometimes. So yes, if a particular training provider is going to go that little extra mile and add in a few things, they may be worth sort of investigating and sticking with. And lots of training providers will help you with the recruitment. I found that really beneficial. Even down to the things that I'm doing, the sort of the first checks of applicants to make sure they're eligible for doing an apprenticeship and all those sorts of checks. If they will do that for you, it's really, really helpful. Okay. Briefly mentioned it, the geography, the location of the provider. If you want them to be local, that's going to dictate who you use. And then make sure you question your training provider thoroughly about how they are going to deliver this training, what background the academic staff are, the tutors are, all that kind of thing. If they're a good provider, they will not mind you asking all these questions and asking for evidence and asking for things to be documented and written down and work plans and all sorts of things and academic calendars and lesson plans all provided to you, so that you have a clear, you've got clear evidence of what training the apprentice is going to undertake and how you can then align that with the duties and the knowledge and the skills and the behaviours. You don't want to be in a situation where your training provider is missing out whole chunks of the standard and then your apprentice isn't able to achieve the evidence and produce the evidence to meet that standard. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And I also just add to that, it's something we still haven't got right every time. We haven't got the right training provider every time, and they may well say a lot of good things. And don't kind of beat yourself up down the line if you think you've chosen the right training provider and then it turns out they're not delivering what they said they would. But do challenge them on that, and we'll come on to that in the next presentation. Sorry, Karen, I think there was, and then, sorry, Karen, I interrupted, but then I think there's a final point just on success rates.
Yeah, exactly. So, how many apprentices have achieved that kind of thing. The education provider, the training provider should be collecting that kind of data themselves within that. And if you've also had an apprentice previously and they've used that particular training provider, you've got and that apprentice, it's worked well and the training provider's been good, use that. It's really important to sort of work on evidence and previous successes. So yeah.
Thanks, Karen. So Karen's talked us through how you work out where your apprentice is going to go, what they're going to actually do, what the course is going to be,
Okay.
and then probably the hardest part. Sorry, has that moved on? Yeah. The hard part of choosing the right training provider. Now it's time to recruit your apprentice. I often get asked what the best time of year to recruit is. I don't think I have a concrete answer, but I would recommend the spring, ready for a September start. Certainly if you're looking at new entrants and getting people in after they've completed A-levels. The difficulty is the earlier you recruit in the year, the bigger the gap there is for the student to find something else or to determine they're doing another pathway. The later you leave it, some of the better candidates are gone. So there isn't a perfect time. Probably the autumn is less of a good time because you've got people that perhaps an apprenticeship isn't the right fit for them. They may not have worked out elsewhere. But we have had good apprentices recruited in the autumn too, so it's not 100%. Each university obviously has its own recruitment process, and it's most likely that you'll need to use whatever internal system you have. The government, I should say, do have a way of getting applications in through the Find an Apprenticeship site, and you can utilise that, but you'll need to discuss that, I guess, with your internal recruitment teams. Allow plenty of time for the recruitment. It's not as simple as recruiting a kind of normal staff member, non-apprentice staff member. You really need to add extra time in to make sure the training provider is on board with the applicant that you're going to pick. There's also quite a lot of documents and enrolment processes that the apprentice will have to do once they've been successfully appointed with the training provider, and lots of liaison with that provider. I think Karen already spoke about them checking the eligibility, and that isn't always a quick thing. And of course, making sure that you as an employer are registered on the government system so that your levy can transfer through, or the payments can go through to the training provider before you start. So when you are ready to advertise, you've got your job description ready, and for the job descriptions, they really should not be hugely different from what you want them to do at the end of the apprenticeship. What we do is we kind of take our actual job description and then just rephrase it to say, instead of doing these things and being able to come in able to do these things, you'll come in to learn to do these things and learn to achieve these things. That way you're going to get what I hope you want, which is a fully competent technician at the end of the apprenticeship. So do consider the role your training provider plays in the recruitment process and selection process. You know, they can be useful to advertise for. One of the big challenges we have as a university, and I'm sure others do too, is that if you're a 18, 19-year-old thinking, oh, well, what can I do as a career? Where can I be a technician? You probably don't necessarily think of a university as the first place. And we have found that, particularly with our engineering apprentices, it's quite tough to get people to realise that you can work at a university. People think that you have to be an academic. Think about your target audience, the wording in your advert, and use social media. We have an apprentice Twitter account. Use school career services, also lots of local networks as well. So we're a member of the West Midland Apprentice Ambassadors Network, and see if your university is a member of anything local where the message can be sent out. And attend open days. So some of our training providers hold open days, which we attend, so we can explain in person to potential applicants. Just thinking about your apprentice, it could well be the first interview they've ever done. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was doing some interviews in our School of Engineering, and two of the applicants both told me it was their first ever interview. So it kind of puts a bit of pressure of you on the panel, because you think, gosh, I'm going to be remembered as this person's first ever interview. One of the things that particular manager did, which was fantastic, is they did a presentation on the actual job role. So they showed them what the equipment they would be using. You know, because of this particular facility, the apprentice wouldn't be able to have access as part of the tour. They actually showed them what the facility looked like, what they would be wearing, so the PPE, etc., some of the kit they'd be using, and that seemed to really engage with the candidates. Try and engage the apprentice in terms of what they have got as examples. They can need a lot more prompting than non-apprenticeship applicants. So get them to think about when they were at school or college or university, any projects they did. And the academic background, as I say, isn't as relevant, but some of your providers will ask, particularly if it's level 4 and above, for minimum requirements. If it's a level 3, then they will possibly require GCSEs, certainly in English and maths, and it would be advantageous, I think, to have someone with a good science GCSE degree. Sorry, GCSE. Consider your competition and say who else is recruiting for apprenticeships, and I do think it's something that isn't done at the moment, but something perhaps universities in local regions could work smarter on together to try and see if one university has one apprenticeship post and has 5 great applicants, another university, same area, has one apprenticeship post but no great applicants. It seems a shame that those people might lose out. And remember the importance of a diverse workforce. So remember that in terms of who's on the panel, how you are attracting, where your adverts are going, to make sure that you're being fully representative of your local community, but also reaching places that perhaps normally you wouldn't reach with your recruitment campaigns. One of the reasons we started our apprenticeship scheme was to diversify our workforce. So the provider, as I say, can advertise directly on your behalf. You might want direct control over the advert. You might have to have direct control over the advert because of it needs to link to your own recruitment system and recruitment processes. Make sure the provider is involved and are checking the eligibility. What we do is we do a bit of a long list. So anyone we know that isn't eligible, we remove them from the process. Anyone where it's a really bad applicant, bad application, we just remove them from the process. And then we ask our training provider to comment on the eligibility. It can be quite complex, particularly with engineering, where they've already got a BTEC, for example. So we really rely on our training providers to confirm they are eligible under the funding rules to undertake the apprenticeship. Some providers are also concerned about English and maths and having in old money C or above, but 4 to 9 in new money. That's because if not, the apprentice will have to do that as part of the apprenticeship. But when thinking about widening participation, you may still have a really good applicant. My view is if you've got the right attitude, you're going to get the right apprentice, even if they don't necessarily have the academic knowledge. So you've hopefully recruited your apprentice, hopefully recruited a good apprentice. And now you've got that intervening time where you're just planning for the induction. So you need to confirm some key information. The first is the start date, and that needs to really align as much as possible with the training provider. Think of the apprenticeship as a ticking clock. So from day one, if they're on a fixed term contract to the end date, you might recruit them on a permanent contract, which is great if you're able to do that. If they are on a fixed term contract, it is a ticking clock. They need to count back from the endpoint assessment and leave 3 months from the endpoint assessment, and make sure that your training provider is on the same page. Because if the training provider thinks it's a 27-month course, you've read on the government site it's 24 months, you've only contracted for 24 months, there's going to be a problem at the end of the apprenticeship and you'll need to apply for extra salary funding. Once you've recruited your apprentice, under the funding rules, you are committed, subject to obviously any internal procedures around conduct and probation, but you are committed to keeping the apprentice there till they've completed their endpoint assessment. Then think about who will be involved in the induction. So, obviously team members, are they going to have a mentor? What standard induction processes are needed, such as mandatory training? Think of the colleagues that will be involved, other managers. Make the apprentice, feel really valued. Look at the background of the apprentice as well. They may be new to a university. It may be quite scary the first time they arrive. I mean, even if you're not, sometimes when you've never worked at university, maybe you've gone to university, just thinking myself, and then come back after about 15 years, it can seem quite scary, all the massive buildings and everything. So, and the formality of it. So just bear those things in mind. What is the most important thing you want to get across in that early stage? And I think it's to be welcoming and to make sure they feel able to ask questions. I think where apprenticeships can go wrong is where they're not able to feel they can ask the questions they need. And the final thing really is develop a training plan. So look at what the training provider has given you. And this is why having a schedule of learning from the provider is really crucial, because that can help you decide what skills you're going to teach on the job at what point. And we'll come on to that more in the presentation next week, but it's really useful to have that plan ready and work with your colleagues, work with different specialists in your area to get that plan ready. So think of the most important things that you'll cover off first. So the enrolment with the training provider, that's a lot of form filling in for everyone involved, and make sure you allow time for that and perhaps agree the date with the training provider in advance. Make sure the basics are there, so the apprentice has access to email and a workplace and really feels welcome, and then obviously mandatory training. Try and make the induction varied, so don't just stick them on a computer for the first 24, first week and say just go through your mandatory training, read through all of these standard operating procedures, and that's that. Think about some informal meetings, take them for a coffee, take them for a tour of the whole campus. That it make them feel real part of the university and the institution. And remember, it's their first ever role, so they'll need to feel part of the team. They'll need to learn the way of working, really, and it may be they need to learn some of those soft skills, and I know we do a lot of Birmingham with our apprentices on that. A good tip is to find a buddy or a mentor, ideally a former apprentice that can help them, because of that will be really, really useful for that. So again, they could meet with a former apprentice and have a bit of a buddy scheme going on. And a really, really good tip is to find something that the apprentice is able to pick up quickly. The apprentice will feel much more content if they know there's something they're coming to work and they can actually do. So it might be a task you think is quite boring, quite mundane, but actually to the apprentice, it means I'm going away and I know I've accomplished something that's useful. So I'm just going to move on now to talk about the education technician standard. For those of you that remember, this is a new standard designed for university technicians. It was a very long piece of work done with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education and the NHS, because it also covers a simulation technician. It's live, it's ready to be used. I know we're using it at Birmingham. Just to mention, the Trailblazer group is beginning the process to review the standard. That may seem quite soon, but the standard has to be reviewed every so often to make sure it's up to date. It's a really useful process because the Institute's changed a number of its processes, and I'm hoping through that we can get some improvements that weren't possible before. We're still looking out for more members to join the group, so if you're interested or you know a technical manager that's interested, please let me, Karen, NTDC know, because we'll be having our first kind of meeting on the 10th of July. And it will be great to have as wide membership of the technical community as possible. If you are interested in joining, there is a commitment to kind of attending the meetings, to going through the documents, making suggestions, listening to others' views, and hopefully collaborating on making some good changes to the standard, so we can get it a bit used more widely. I'll pass back to Karen now, who's just going to talk very briefly about the new network for technical apprenticeship managers, NTAM, as we're calling it.
Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, it's all in the name. It's like, what are we going to call it? So it's like choosing the colour for something. Everybody's very, very interested in things like that. So yeah, we're really excited about this network. I think when we sort of had our first meeting, was it last week or the week before? Can't remember. A huge amount of people joined us, which was absolutely wonderful. And we recognise the need for this network because we've done these presentations about recruiting an apprentice, having an apprentice in your team and things like that. And then the next step then for us was, well, actually, now that lots of technical managers have got apprentices in their teams, we could do with a network and some way of sharing their experiences and things like that and their knowledge and that kind of stuff further down the line now to help support as well those people who are not quite in that apprenticeship employment route. So as it says there, the network's aimed at managers who supervise one or more apprentices. Now, it's not, take me, for example, so I manage my apprentices, but as I say, I don't do the operational day-to-day management. So the operational managers would be perfectly welcome in this network as well as me. It's about the network is about including people who are working with apprentices and managing apprentices from different angles, if you like, because that's how we build our knowledge, and that's how we all experience, have different experiences with our apprentices in an apprenticeship program. So the members can use a mailing list. So the NTDC and Savannah have set up a JISC mailing list. I know that loads and loads of people have already joined. So that's managed with the NTDC, and it basically works as a kind of online Q&A service, continual. If you think of a question at 2 o'clock in the morning, log on and ask the question. It's fine. We'll come to some of the questions in the chat. So is that Emma? Yeah, saying I feel like I signed up for this but didn't hear about the meeting. So, but yeah, would that be all right, Savannah? We'll answer those questions as we go along. And it might be from that locally the members of NTAM will want to set up their own slightly smaller regional networks, for example. So yeah, so you can scan the QR code to join the network. And there is information on the NTDC website as well. Savannah, is that right? Yep, excellent.
Yeah, it's on the website. I've also popped a direct link in the chat if that's easier.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. We haven't got a full, so I think it was Emma who asked the question. We haven't got a full program of meetings set up and things yet. We want the network as well to be steered by the members. You know, if you've got ideas about what you want to chat about or meet about or discuss, please do let us know. We're in the very early stages of forming it, so it's open to ideas from anybody really. So
am I right to just jump in quickly, Karen?
yes.
So yeah, the plan is once we've kind of got it established and a bit more populated and got the word out there, that we'll set up an initial meeting, just people to familiarise themselves with each other and kind of what the network's about and gauge what people are after. We did send out an initial survey for what people were interested in, and yeah, the main thing was to have that kind of network where people can speak, but a few people were interested in, you know, semi-regular online meetings and just an informal catch-up. So that is, yeah, the plan is in place. We'll just yeah, we need you all on it first.
Yeah, a bit of data sort of collation and analysis to do really from everybody who completed the survey. So yeah, thanks, Sav.
Just seeing that we've got a little bit of time for questions. If Karen and I can talk about apprenticeships for
yeah. Sorry, I've clicked on mute there. Yes, the thank you slide. That's to say thank you to everybody for attending and listening to us both talking about apprenticeships.
Yeah. So I can answer a few of these questions and Karen chip in.
Yeah, if there are lots of questions and we run out of time, what we've done previously is Caleb and myself and colleagues at the NTDC, we work sort of remotely and we'll go through and provide structured answers to the questions and add those onto the FAQ section of the website, the NTDC apprenticeship website, so that we're not missing people, and it also ensures that we can provide really detailed answers and if necessary any further links and that kind of thing. So if we don't get to everybody's questions, we will eventually after this meeting, if that's all right. Thank you. So yeah, sorry Caleb, in the chat what have we got?
That's fine. I was just trying to quickly look up the reference number for the education technician. I mean, if you literally just Google Institute for Apprenticeships education technician, the standard will come up, but I can get that number for you.
I've come across it now, Caleb, thanks.
You've got it, brilliant.
Yeah,
thanks.
cheers.
Thank you. And where can we find the Trailblazer group? So if it's a Trailblazer group for the education technician, drop NTDC or myself an email and I'm happy to meet with you and discuss it. If you want to join the group, that'd be fantastic. If it's other Trailblazer groups, they're on the Institute for Apprenticeships website, and there's a list of the membership there, and they're all kind of already up and running, and they're not run by myself, they're run by colleagues in other businesses and other employers. So, but feel free to look at those. What dictates the cost of funding for the Trailblazer? That is a contentious
Sorry,
issue.
I shouldn't laugh, but we've been through this experience, haven't we, Caleb?
And probably would take more than 4 minutes to explain, but I'm happy to put a link in about the funding model the Institute uses at the moment. I should say it changes quite often. We talked about the meeting. The slides and the recordings will be on the website, Sav?
Yeah, so I'll upload them to the website and our YouTube, but I'll also send out a follow-up email with all that in for everybody who's registered today. So you'll all receive a link to that as well.
And the last question's from Emma at NTU. Emma, I can get in touch with you directly if that's okay. We can have a chat, or yeah, I'll send you. I'll get contacts from Sab and send you an email if that's okay. And if you want to unmute, just to sort of acknowledge that is okay.
Yes, that's great. Sorry, I was nodding and then I really couldn't necessarily see.
Yeah, can't see everybody on the screen, I'm afraid. There's lots of people. So yeah, lovely. Okay. Yeah, I'll be in touch. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
I think we have, are there any more questions? I think we've got a couple of minutes. Either put them in the chat or...
All about salary.
Salary, okay. because they're looking to set up a registered to that. So I can talk about, obviously each university will have a different kind of salary profile, and that will be determined through the HR team and negotiations, etc. I can talk about what we do at Birmingham. So if it's an existing staff apprentice, they have to have 12-month service. They have to, it has to be a higher level and specialist role, and their salary wouldn't change. When it's a new entrant apprenticeship, the expectation is they are new to the workforce, and they are paid at our apprenticeship rate. So for the first 12 months for us, they're paid at 80% of the role they're working towards. And then after 12 months, they go up to the entry point of that. But other universities do different things. That's just what we do at Birmingham. Some people do it based on a specific rate based on the level of course they're undertaking. Some people pay them the full salary. Some people pay different other things as well. I don't know what you do, Karen.
Yeah, it definitely varies from institute to institute. We've only got initials of the individual who's asked this question, so I do apologise. I don't know your name, but I would get in touch with your HR recruitment and reward team, because it's likely that you will have a process in place about how you reward staff, how they move up through their spine points. The apprenticeship, their salary will probably stay as it is while they're training, but it may be that you have a bit of a reward system or an increase in a payment if each year they complete, for example. It's completely different. So definitely get in touch with them. You don't want to be doing anything outside your standard institute's processes as regards pay and salary and things like that. Is that okay?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's that. So thank you so much, everyone, for today. I hope you found it useful. We'll be back next week to do part 2.
It's like an episode on the series on the BBC, if only.
Where we'll be going through the stages after you've recruited. So your apprentice has started, what happens now, and we'll be going through that then. So look forward to seeing most of you then.
Lovely.
And hope your week goes well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy some sunshine over lunchtime if you can.
Yeah.